Okay, so chapter 4, section 6 onwards, then we're just going to start thinking now um, about considering the business a little bit more, but then moving on to thinking about, how I'm actually going to choose a strategy now and then go on to implement it. So the first thing we can see here is talking about a technique called SWOT analysis. So SWOT analysis is all to do with saying, well, what are the business's internal strengths and weaknesses, and what does the business need to consider externally in terms of opportunities it may have, and any threats that it may face. So SWOT analysis is a really key technique, and that's because it includes both that internal and external focus. Now, there are a couple of ways to look at SWOT. We call that either the positioning-based approach or the resource-based approach. So the positioning-based approach says, well, where are we? What is our business? How do we fit into the market? And that kind of uses that as a springboard then to start thinking about what we're going to do. Resource-based approach says, well, actually, what am I really good at? What are my core competencies? And then that will drive forward what my strategy is going to be in the future. Now, in terms of what strategies we can actually choose, or which strategic objectives we're going to use, we really need to think about what we're trying to do. So really, who am I trying to please is a nice way to think about it. So who are we trying to please? And not only who are we trying to please, but also how am I going to do that? Okay, so this is going to bring in our stakeholder analysis. So we've spoken about stakeholders a few times before, so hopefully we're quite familiar with what that means. Now, stakeholder analysis using Mendelow's matrix, which we've got underneath here in green, basically says, well, who are my stakeholders and how do they fit into this grid of a measurement of power, so how much power they have over us as a stakeholder, and what is their interest within the business. So it's really important that we are able to categorize our stakeholders into this matrix, and then we can start thinking about what I'm going to do to keep them satisfied or happy or whatever we might decide. So like I said, Mendeley came up with this matrix to combine both power and interest. So for example, if you had a stakeholder who was very powerful, had a lot of influence over you, and also had a high amount of interest in your business for whatever reason, whether it's for supply of materials or whether it's because you employ a lot of people in the community, we would call those people a key player. For example, you might find a major customer in this position. Okay, so somebody who could potentially have a lot of power over you, and it's going to be really interested in what you're doing because they're going to not want to know what the next product is coming out, how reliable your supply is, and so on. The other end of the scale then would be somebody who actually you don't need to worry about at all. So somebody who has no power over you and isn't really interested in what you're doing either. Now, although when you're discussing these quadrants, it doesn't really matter too much. You do sometimes see them labeled A to D. So I'm just going to pop the corresponding letter on each quadrant, just so we're happy, just in case they were to refer to these in the exam. So minimal effort, so low power and low interest would be quadrant A, and then high power and high interest would be quadrant D. Quadrant B then, where we have low power but relatively high interest, well, this could be something to do with where we're based. So maybe some sort of community representative. So the community representative may well be concerned about noise pollution or littering or jobs in the area, but actually they're probably going to have relatively little power over you. So we need to make sure we keep them informed, keep them up to date with what the new processes are going to be, what the new plans for the business are, and if you make them informed, then they'll feel like they're satisfying that need for information. Quadrant C then, keep satisfied, would be where you'd have a stakeholder or a stakeholder group with high power but relatively low interest. So as long as you're keeping them ticking over, they're happy just to let you get on with it. So for example, a large institutional shareholder. Okay. So far in this chapter, then we've thought about the overall process to choosing a strategy. So we've thought about what kind of business we are, what our mission is. We thought about what we can do, what we can't do, what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are. We've now thought about those stakeholders that we need to answer to. Now we can start thinking about, well, how much work is there to do? So if you consider, a lot of our work has been thinking about where we are. Okay, so this is where we currently are as an organization, and obviously our strategy is going to involve, where we want to be. So this is going to be my plan somewhere down the road there. Now, a gap analysis is saying, well, let's think about how much work we actually have to do here. So this is going to represent my gap. And depending on how big that gap is, we're going to have some sort of strategy to bridge that gap. So where we are is our current position. Where we want to be is our future vision or our goal. And then the objective, or the strategy, is going to be how we're going to get from one place to the other. Now, section 9 starts off by asking, well, actually, do we really need a new corporate strategy? Now, obviously, we're going to have a corporate strategy, but if there's no gap, then actually we might just be able to carry on as we are. Maybe there's no need. We've performed a review and there's no need for us to change. There's no gap, so we're happy with where we're heading. However, obviously that's not going to be lots of questions for the exam, so we need to think about or assume that there's going to be some sort of gap. And I think for most businesses that's going to be the case. There's not many organizations out there that are going to be happy where they are, so it's all about improvement. Now, obviously in real life there are thousands of strategies, and every business will have different options available to them. So what we try to do here at the end of chapter 4 now is to think about, let's try and categorize some of these objectives, or some of these strategies that a business can adopt. Okay, so we're going to come up with a few different types of strategy. The first model we're going to look at is our friend Porter again, so very popular in terms of this area. And Porter came up with what we call 3 generic competitive strategies. So Porter said that there were 3 ways in which you can compete. You can compete by having the lowest cost in the industry. Now, it is important for us to recognize that doesn't necessarily mean that they're offering the lowest prices. Yes, it's absolutely possible for a company to be able to secure lots of cost savings on economies of scale and that sort of thing, while still maintaining selling a normal market price. It doesn't necessarily mean the lowest prices, however it often does lead to that. You can also compete then through differentiation. So either you decide to be the cheapest, so you're able to have a big margin, a big value adding activity by keeping your costs really low, or you try and do something different. So you try and make a product that you deem to be unique. Now, there are lots of examples of these 2 different strategies. For simplicity, we can think maybe for argument's sake of Primark for cost leadership, and perhaps Apple for differentiation. So Apple don't necessarily worry too much about being affordable. They just say, well, this is the product that people are going to want to buy. Now, the third strategy is actually just a kind of a rehash of those 2. And Porter went on to say, well, it is possible to do one of these 2 strategies, so cost leadership or differentiation, but for a particular market segment only. So, for example, for over 50s, or for a particular area or geographical region. So again, you can focus on being low cost, or you can focus on being different and unique, but only for that one segment. So those are the 3 generic strategies. Ansoff's matrix looked at what products or services we currently offer. So what are we currently doing? And then giving ourselves some options in terms of doing something new. So this matrix focused on the products that we offer and the markets that we operate in. And as you can see, we talk about our existing market and existing product, and we think about our new products that we could possibly introduce and any new markets that we could enter. So using this matrix, we can see that there are 4 possible options for an organization, according to Ansoff. So the first quadrant there is looking at our existing products and our existing market. So you could say, it's doing more of the same. So focus on what you're currently doing. You know the product is in place already. You know the market. You know what sells and what doesn't sell. So let's really push the product that we're currently selling. So for example, introducing some sort of loyalty scheme to really encourage people to increase their current buying. Now, the problem with that really, I guess, is there's going to be some sort of saturation. So either the market will be saturated, or there's only so many of a certain product you can sell. So let's think about doing something slightly different. So quadrant 2 there then is looking at my product development. So we're maintaining our existing market, so selling to people that we already know, that we already have experience with, and we're introducing a new product into the market. So the idea behind that is that it's a lot easier to sell to existing customers than to try and find new customers. So if I've got a popular product, I can introduce another product alongside it. People will recognize my brand and they'll say, yes, I want to buy that too. Quadrant 3 then says, well, let's look at it in a slightly different point of view. I've already got a popular product potentially, so let's maybe introduce that to a new market. So this could be a new geographical region. It could be a new segment of the market. So previously selling to the younger market, maybe I can also sell this product to the older market, almost along the lines of the Nintendo DS when they started introducing the brain training games. Quadrant 4 then is the riskiest of the 4 options. So with quadrants 1, 2 and 3, so protect and build, product development or market development, there's an element of the known there. So either we are selling the same product as always, or we're selling to the same people as always, or in fact both of those things. Diversification says, well, let's launch a new product in a new region. Now, the good thing about this is it could be potentially very lucrative. Could be lots of return associated with that. But as we know, high return normally means high risk as well. So the fact that we don't really know about the market, we don't really know about the product, we don't even know if it's going to be a successful product, that obviously means that there's a lot of risk for us to face. When we move on to chapter 5, in fact, we'll start thinking a bit more about risk. The final part of section 9 then over the page there is trying to think about whether these different strategic options are going to be good for us as an organization. So we're going to evaluate them. And the criteria that we need to know here for section 9.4 is the SAF analysis. So SAF analysis was put together by Johnson and Scholes, and it was essentially a way to evaluate different strategic options. So SAF stands for suitability, acceptability, and feasibility. And we'll just run through those different tests to see whether or not an option is good for us. So first of all, suitability. You really only want a strategic option that is going to fit my overall direction. So for example, if we're known for producing high quality premium goods, we may not want to introduce some sort of budget range. So that might be a nice example. Acceptability is directed towards stakeholders. So we've seen how important the stakeholder analysis is, and considering all of the different stakeholders that we need to consider. However, we can still think of shareholders as being, the number one stakeholder, and acceptability towards stakeholders just means, well, is it making me some more money? Feasibility then says, well, it's all very well saying it's in line with my strategy overall. It's all very well saying that it's acceptable to my stakeholders, but can I actually do it? So do I have the resources? Do I have the knowledge and the expertise in order to carry this strategy out? And the idea, therefore, is that you go through each of those 3 criteria, and if the answer is yes to all of those, then it's a good option for us. The final part of chapter 4 then, just looking at section 10 here, it's just a few bits and pieces around strategy that you need to know, just in case they were to give you a pretty basic learn and churn style question in the exam. And it just requires us then to think about the difference between business strategies and functional strategies. So business strategies think about overall for an SBU, for one of those strategic business units, how do we gain competitive advantage? And then a functional strategy breaks that down a bit further and says, well, let's think about all those different departments that we're going to have to consider and think about how that strategy is going to impact on those. Okay, that's chapter 4 then. Next up with chapter 5, we'll be looking at risk management. So talking about different types of risk and thinking about what we can do to kind of reduce them.